everybody. Back for another episode of Need Some Introduction. In today's episode, we will be recapping the first 3 episodes of Nine Perfect Strangers, the new series on FX on Hulu, available on Hulu, and at some point available on FX as well. We've been watching it on Hulu. It just premiered last week. And like I mentioned, these are 3 episodes all in one shot. So this is a pretty long episode. You can expect to see the follow-up recap episodes to probably drop on Mondays, possibly Tuesdays, after everybody has time to watch the show, including ourselves. Also, if you are actually watching Nine Perfect Strangers, you may have already seen the preview for a show called Only Murders in the Building, which is a pretty interesting show for me and Sona to be covering. First of all, it takes place in Manhattan, where Sona lives. Second of all, it has Steve Martin and Martin Short and Selena Gomez, of all people, as a trio of podcasters, which is another interesting intersection here, that are trying to solve a murder that may have occurred in their building. And as they're unraveling this murder, this whodunit, it's possible that they have become the next targets of the murderer themselves. So this is definitely going to be a whodunit. It's going to be a comedy for sure. And we think this is going to be a pretty entertaining topic to cover. And it's starting on the 29th. So at some point as we make these shorter episodes, because like I mentioned before, this is 3 episodes all in one shot. They will be 1 episode per week. So these recaps should be shorter. And we'll have time there to review this new show, Only Murders in the Building, as well, also available on Hulu. And of course, when Evil does come back from hiatus, we will be recapping those episodes as well, probably to a lesser extent, although anything that we might miss along the way, we will definitely have a season retrospective, something to discuss like a season recap, like we did for season 1 of Evil as well. Also, the Emmy Awards are coming up, and as some of you may know, Mayor of Easttown has many nominations and will probably win a bunch of awards. So if you're catching up on that show, we do have recaps of those episodes. So if you want to get caught up on the conversation, you don't really have anyone to talk to about these things right now because it's kind of, you may have missed the boat. Well, you can always listen to our conversations and feel like you're participating in that very popular and successful show. That's in the same feed, so look back through the catalog and you'll find them. And of course, all those things I mentioned as far as recapping this show, Nine Perfect Strangers, as well as Only Murders in the Building, and The Return of Evil will all be covered here in the same feed. So all that content coming this way, make sure you follow us so you know when that content is available. Anyways, a long conversation. Let's get into it. See you on the other side.
And I like it.
Today, we will be beginning our recap of Nine Perfect Strangers. I'm with Sona again.
Hi.
Which is just started this week with a 3-episode premiere on FX on Hulu. Normally, they do show up on Hulu, I think within a week or so. They air on Hulu first, and then they go to FX, because I watched Devs on Hulu, but I know people who watched it on FX. So I don't know exactly how this thing becomes available after the fact, but
It's beyond me, that's for sure.
but if you have Hulu, you can watch it right now, and I'm sure it'll pop up on FX as well if you're watching on cable, so you can catch up on these later on. But the show itself is based on a book called Nine Perfect Strangers by Liane Moriarty, which who also wrote Big Little Lies. And she, of course, had the success on that HBO show with Nicole Kidman, and also with David E. Kelley as the creator and one of the writers of the show. David E. Kelley, of course, famous for a whole bunch of things, right? The Practice, LA Law, Ally McBeal, Picket Fences. And I guess he kind of had like a dry spell there for a while. And now recently he's kind of had a big resurgence. I think he has like 4 or 5 shows on simultaneously, Big Little Lies. And he just did, what was that show? Was it called The Undoing? Is that what it's called?
Yes, The Undoing. So also with Nicole Kidman.
Also with Nicole Kidman, right? And Nicole Kidman, also producer on this show as well as on The Undoing. So this is kind of, a partnership between her, Kelly, and she has been buying books to adapt. So, and of course, there's been a lot of success around that as well. So that's kind of a pattern we're seeing here.
And I think he's married to Michelle Pfeiffer, if I'm not
Yes,
mistaken.
I think they still are married. Yes, I think you're correct.
Trivia, yeah.
Yeah. And the show does star Nicole Kidman, as well as Melissa McCarthy, Michael Shannon, who else? Samara Weaving, which I'll kind of go into some of these people. You may have seen them. These are a lot of people like I know these people. Bobby Cannavale, of course, very well known. Regina Hall, who's been around for a long time.
Love her.
Yeah, and it's fun to see her here. Like not glammed up, but very
yes.
fun to see her kind of And I hope they give her a bigger part than in the book. Kim told me that her part in the book is small, so hopefully they beefed her up. Considering they got Regina Hall for the role, I assume they made her part bigger. They have Manny Jacinto, by the way, from The Good Place.
Him.
Great on The Good Place. Yeah, so a lot of people here that are very recognizable. We'll kind of break down who they are later on as well when we kind of dig into it. So I'll just give you a really general overview. We're going to go through 3 episodes in one shot, possibly break them all down like we probably will in more detail in the later episodes. But so I'll just give you a very high level overview. But basically the premise is that these 9 perfect strangers are going to go to a retreat, Tranquillum, right? Tranquillum? Tranquillium, yes, Tranquillium, of course. Mm-hmm. And so a 10-day retreat. And so far for the first 3 episodes, it seems to be going day by day, but there's only 8 episodes. So maybe that's a spoiler in the structure of the show, possibly. So they go on this retreat. They all have their own baggage that we are not given access to right away. I think it's part of the mystery of the show itself, maybe how these people might potentially be interconnected. And basically we meet these 9 strangers and they go on this retreat together and they have many different experiences.
Just based on the premise, this seems like my idea of a dream vacation, but it doesn't, it doesn't seem like it's going to turn out that way, but it seems like paradise. It's a beautiful setting, lots of time to just be zen and do yoga and sit by the pool and all of that stuff. So like it has this setup of being, I think, very attractive, the idea of putting yourself in an experience like this, although, I suspect it's not going to work out that way by the end.
That was my first question I had for you as I was watching this is, I mean, obviously this is completely heightened, but, I have never been on one of these type of retreats. And I know you enjoy these type of retreats, right? You've been on a few of these, not exactly like this, of course.
Yeah, not at this high level, but yeah,
right.
I do enjoy the spa experience and all of that. Yeah.
So I was just curious to know from your personal experiences of going to these spas and these kind of retreats, like how this is obviously a caricature. That's the whole point of making a TV show out of it. But to what extent does this feel realistic as far as like, having these kind of team building activities, having these, maybe some kind of, spiritual therapy, let's call it, or things like that. Like, is that something that you think is a part of this culture? I mean, it definitely is a part of this culture, right? But I mean, how close is this to something that you think could be realistic as opposed to this being a complete cartoon? What do you think?
I haven't done it at this level of like a Canyon Ranch type of scenario. Yes. That's a really famous one. There's a few other really famous, Miraval, Life in Balance. That's a famous one. But my experiences are that like, it is very similar to what I have experienced, except for that psychological component that seems to be there where you're discussing your deepest, darkest demons. I don't think most of those places don't really have the time or resources to get into that with you. And I think they focus more on the idea of physical well-being leading to mental well-being. I mean, maybe to the extent of meditation and yoga, but not really in this confronting your demons way, or, when we get to the 3rd episode, this idea of living off the land, that kind of thing. Seems a bit extreme. I will say one thing that is kind of novel that I'll bring up, and it hasn't happened here. I don't know if it will happen here, but there's a place in Massachusetts called Kripalu Institute. I'm not sure exactly, but my mom has been there. I haven't been there. And they run a bunch of programs that, maybe are more similar to what is shown here. And one of the programs they run, which my mom has done, and it's a very Eastern religion thing to do, is you sign up to go for a certain number of days. My mom might have done 3 or 4 days. And it's a silent retreat. You're not allowed to speak at all.
Yes.
And that to me always seemed, I don't think I'm a chatterbox necessarily, but that always seemed to me something that would be insurmountable for me to accomplish.
But let me just interject really quickly. Two things. One is that Kim, my wife, has been to Canyon Ranch, by the way, but and I've never. I actually should ask her, the same question I asked you about how close this is. But when she told me about Canyon Ranch, she basically described it as she was the type of person that she had people who went to Canyon Ranch with her and one of her friends who had been personal trainers, they basically did tons of activities, hiking and this and that and the other thing. But other folks were just like kind of chilling out and like getting massages and staying in their room. So it still seemed very much like you were describing, that it's very much just kind of like a lot of different activities, and you can do as many of them as you want.
Right. They're not necessarily trying to force you out of your comfort zone, but they'll urge you out of your comfort zone. And I do think some of them do have very restricted diets as well, which might be something that you can opt in and out of. But I do think some of them are super healthy, very like no animal protein, stuff like that.
Yeah, they definitely had a controlled diet at Canyon Ranch. I guess you could opt in and out, but I mean, they had a lot of those options. Oh, but the last thing I wanted to mention is in the book itself, which she is currently reading. She's almost finished with it. And maybe she'll come on at some point to add some of this detail. But I wanted to let you know that the first half of the book and the first 5 days that they are on in the compound is silent. So they cannot speak for the whole entire first 5 days. So it's very different from what's happening in the show right now. Obviously, it's very difficult to make this, dramatic if no one could speak.
Yes.
But what she was describing is that apparently in the book, almost the whole entire first half of the book is these people who are not only silent, but they are very interior. Like we're discovering all these like traumas. Basically in their own heads, because they are not interacting with each other, right? They're brushing against each other and they're curious about each other, but they're not like having this kind of
interactions.
We're not seeing these kind of like animosity breaking out the way we see on the show already. It's at a very different tempo, basically.
Yeah, I mean, you can imagine, right, what happens when you're left alone with your own thoughts. It's kind of terrifying.
Right. So back into the show. So we begin, and by the way, my wife has filled me in just as far on that first episode that where we begin in the episode is very different than the show.
Okay.
That the book begins with Masha having her episode, which I guess we'll just go into detail of a bit later. We'll leave it until we get to it in the story. But that kind of happens initially, and then it's almost like you don't know what that episode means, right? And then we basically, in chapter 2 or chapter 3, like pretty early on, we start to basically have the sequence we see in the show. So this is the same, where they are arriving at the ranch. Right? Then we get introduced to everybody, right? So the first car we see is the family, right? We have a husband, a wife, and a daughter. Michael Shannon, who people probably know from a bunch of things. He was in Boardwalk Empire. I think he got an Oscar nomination for Revolutionary Road. He's in a great movie called Take Shelter. If you've never seen it, it's very, very good with Jessica Chastain in him. It's excellent. Psychological thriller. Very, very good. He's very intense. He's a very intense actor. Usually plays a bad guy. He was Zod in the new Superman movies, so he's usually a bad guy. But I do like when they cast him as, in a non-threatening role. Although they kind of give him, I've seen him like just be a straight up romantic lead, for example. This is like kind of splitting the difference, where he obviously is a dad figure, but he also has a real intensity to him too, right? So, especially in the most recent episode, which we'll get into the third episode, where he, acts out, let's say. The daughter is Grace Van Patten. She's playing Zoe. And I've only seen her, I guess she's been in a bunch of things, maybe like teen movies and stuff. I saw her only in the Meyerowitz Chronicles on Netflix. And that's a great movie. She plays Adam Sandler's daughter, and it's really, really good.
Okay.
Movie. And she gives a really good performance there. This is a few years back, maybe 2-3 years ago now at this point. The wife is an Australian actress, which I've never seen in anything at all, but apparently she's pretty well known in Australia. This show was shot in Australia, by the way, although it's supposed to be in California. It was shot during COVID. It was shot during COVID. And, there's quite a few people in the cast who are Samara Weaving is also Australian. So there's a lot of Australians.
I think it's very cute that you're referring to COVID in the past tense, by the way, but go ahead.
Yes. Well, when they weren't shooting, that's why, I mentioned it, because this is back when Australia had almost 0 cases at that point. So they could.
Yes, Australia was the place to be. Yeah.
Exactly. So ironically enough, and there's the other thing that's very funny about it. The book is set in Australia. The show is shot in Australia. but they've transposed it from Australia
To
to the US
California.
to California.
Hmm.
And yet, the cast is very Australian as well.
That's
So
funny.
very strange combination of things. But for the purposes of the show, we're supposed to be in California, not in Australia. And that's the family we meet, right? And we see a little tension amongst them, and we find out more about what's happening in the family later, which is very sad, by the way. But
Devastating. Yeah.
especially with the twin situation. But I guess we'll flesh that out as we get into it. And then the next car we see is Samara Weaving, who had a big breakout a couple of years ago with a horror movie called Ready or Not, a deadly game of hide and seek.
Mm-hmm.
and it was like a big hit a couple of years ago, and it was kind of like on the wave of this upper class, lower class. There's a bunch of horror movies that kind of came out that kind of talked about the class struggle, and this was one of them. And she had a real breakout in that, and now she's been signed up for a bunch of projects, so she's going to be in a lot of different things. And she's here. She's playing like kind of like an Instagram famous model, or maybe just a personality, who's married to Melvin Gregg. And Melvin Gregg started off in, I think he was just a basketball player, possibly not a professional basketball player, but he was in a Netflix show called American Vandal, which is hilarious. If you've never seen it, it's very funny.
I have heard good things about it, and I haven't seen it. Yeah.
Oh my God, this show is so funny. If people haven't watched it, definitely catch up on this. It's like a fake reality show made by, supposedly in the context of the show, made by like high schoolers, that somebody is a vandal who's going around putting sexually explicit graffiti on the cars in the parking lot, and they're trying to unravel who commit. So it's like mocks all of the different techniques that you see in these true crime dramas, and it's absolutely hilarious. And that's the first time I ever saw this actor. And then I saw him again playing a basketball player yet again, by the way, played a basketball player in that show, played a basketball player in High Flying Bird, which I also recommended recently, a movie that just came out last year, also on Netflix. And now I think this is I don't know if he's acted in between there, but this is the third time I've seen him, and his roles seem to be getting a little bit bigger, and his the amount that's required of him is as an actor is getting more complex. He's a more fleshed out character here. But anyway, yeah, so he plays the husband, and we find out how he got rich. He's driving a very nice car when we meet them, and he's kind of annoyed for his wife being on the phone all the time, trying to Instagram the trip. And of course, they have to surrender their car. They have to surrender their phones when they get to the resort, which they don't know yet.
Yeah, I found this couple very likable, actually. And I also, even though, I expected to find the influencer character annoying, but I find her really likable. And I love how in that first scene, she's doing that Kardashian vocal fry kind of voice. So you get immediately, the type of personality she is and the type of audience she attracts.
But I think you're right. Like, she could be someone could have played her, let's say, in a very, very like kind of irritating way.
Yes.
And then
that's what I expected.
Right. And then humanize her later. And I feel like you said that she's like kind of vacuous, but there is something kind of likable and charming about her. She seems kind of like naive, not naive. I don't mean naive. I mean, there's something kind of like sincere, I'd say, about her, so that she never feels like she is, obnoxious. She's not putting anyone down. She seems to be good-hearted. And then we find out, about her own, personality issues later on. They humanize her immediately rather than trying to make her into like a caricature and then just to poke fun at.
Right. I agree. And that was a nice surprise for me, because I thought I knew what they were going to do with her character, and I was surprised.
So with that, that's 5 of the folks. Oh, and then we meet Melissa McCarthy, right? Who's of course the biggest name in this project for sure.
And how great is this character?
Yeah.
I love her.
Yeah. So she is openly irritating. And I think that and they let her go very big, because I think she has, because she's Melissa McCarthy, and because she can play this type of character anyway, she gets away with being like maybe the most unlikable character.
I love it.
In this show. And she basically finds out she's an author, and we find out a lot more about her. But I guess she's like kind of a Stephanie Meyers, like someone like who wrote like a book like Twilight or something, some kind of romance that was very viral and very successful. And I guess like her career just has gone down since then, her success, I should say. And then she's basically getting fired. So she's getting fired from her publisher as she's arriving at the resort, and she basically has like a breakdown in the middle of the road, and that's when Bobby Cannavale, comes and kind of tries to help, quote unquote, and in the most stereotypical way. And then we get introduced to him as well. But
in this, In this opening interaction, which was so fun to watch for me, I loved his closing of, you're a tragic person. Like, how many times have you wanted to say that to someone?
Yeah.
When you realize, why am I even wasting my time here? I'm done.
I do like all the jokes about like how she's trying to like basically get rid of him by saying like, oh, I'm having a hot flash or something. Like anything to do with menstruation would scare him off.
And he just doubles down, right?
Yeah,
I'm like,
exactly.
have you tried progesterone? Or
yeah. And then later she tries to say, oh, I have cramps. He goes like, I don't think you can have cramps and hot flashes.
First of all, I think it is possible to have cramps and hot flashes. So I will defend her on that. But I think it's so funny because that is such a stereotypical thing that would work on so many men of our generation anyway. Maybe, the younger generation is more progressive, but to just say like, you know what, it's that time of the month. And then they just back away.
Right. Like too much information. I'm out.
Tried it.
Yeah. Oh yeah. But he's got more advice. Exactly.
Yeah.
And then we finally find out more about him, actually just in the third episode, where you kind of get his backstory. So that gets us to 7, right? And we got 2 left. And we meet the last 2 basically at a convenience store. One is Luke Evans, who we find out very little about. He is the shadiest of these characters so far. We really don't know his, I was actually just talking to my wife about it this morning. It's like and I guess she knows his backstory because she's right further ahead. But up until now, and we'll get into it when we break down the episode, but like we still don't know what his agenda is. He definitely has some agenda going on, but we don't know yet what that agenda is. He's like kind of leaking information, and he's I don't know if he's reviewing them or he's a journalist or something, because there's something else going on here. And I don't know exactly what that is yet. And he also is there buying some snacks, which are like prohibited on
contraband.
Yep. And simultaneously, he's also there with Regina Hall, which we mentioned before, who plays Luke Evans is called Lars, and Regina Hall's character is Carmel. And they meet each other there, and they have a mean interaction. And we also see that Carmel kind of gets affronted by, so she's very sweet on the outside, but then she has like this, she can go off, and we see her go off a few times. She has a hair trigger, apparently.
Yes.
And we kind of see a little bit of it there, just a tease of it there, but we'll see more of it as the show goes on. Oh, I wanted to call out a couple of things here. One is, which reminded me actually of White Lotus, is I really liked the director here, by the way, directing the entire show instead of like sometimes you get multiple directors. This is all directed by Jonathan Levine, who's done a bunch of movies. He did like 50-50, but he's also made Long Shot recently with Charlize Theron and Seth Rogen.
Yeah, that was a good movie. Very entertaining.
Yeah, so he's been around for a while now. He's made some pretty good films here and there, because I really liked the title sequence as kind of like setting a tone. I thought it was pretty cool. And I also like the opening sequence of like the blender blending the making the smoothies, which is like a motif. It kind of comes back multiple times. And it actually has, it's actually, I guess they're teasing it because it ties into the plot later on. Yeah. But I actually really love just the visuals of like these kind of like these things that are separate kind of blending together, which I guess is kind of what the show is going to be about also. But I thought it was a very interesting and kind of beautiful way to start the show off.
Yeah, it's very pretty.
So that's how it kicks off before we kind of get introduced to all these characters. Then they arrive at the spa and they start to butt heads almost immediately, right? But was there anything that kind of grabbed you right away? Like
I liked it a lot. I mean, really, this show had me from the start, I feel. Because I am really interested in these characters. I find them likable. I like the way they're interacting with each other. I like I know we said we'd use character names, but I don't. Melissa McCarthy is Frances.
Yeah.
Bobby Cannavale is
Tony.
Who? Tony. I like the Frances Tony interactions that they've started, from the first moment that they saw each other, essentially. And I like how that relationship is continuing to evolve. And yeah, I mean, I thought it was great. I liked everyone's alarm at losing their phones, because I certainly would be alarmed as well if I was not prepared for that.
I felt, and Kim was mentioning this in the context of the book, but I felt right away, even like in those early interactions, that they were setting up Melissa McCarthy and I guess I'll use their names again too, Frances and Tony, to be a couple. Do you think that they're going to hook up on the show?
It wouldn't surprise me. I don't know if it's necessarily being set up that way at this point, but it definitely wouldn't surprise me.
It just felt that way to me. Even from the very start, I kind of felt like there was just something there. And as it's evolved, obviously they've become friendlier throughout the show. And I guess that's kind of the direction of where it goes. And then we get introduced to Masha, who's Nicole Kidman's character, who runs and founded the resort.
To be honest with you, we probably are supposed to be fascinated with this character, but I am not.
I agree.
So I've never been the biggest Nicole Kidman fan. I'm not anti Nicole Kidman, but I'm just neutral about her. And, as I texted you, the only text exchange we had about the show is that I'm essentially tone deaf. I don't know a good accent from a bad accent, but I'm pretty sure this is a bad accent.
This is a bad accent. And yeah, I agree. I used to be a huge fan of Nicole Kidman. I used to think I used to be like, anything she makes, I would go see. This is back when she was only making movies, because I felt like even if the movie wasn't great, her performance would be really great. There's a movie, for example, called Birth that came out maybe 10 years ago, maybe more at this point, where she lives in New York, and her husband is in the very first scene, not a spoiler, very first scene of the movie, during the title sequence, actually. He's like a young, healthy guy. He's going for a run and just unexpectedly has a heart attack in Central Park. It's snowing. It's beautiful.
I've seen that movie. Can you remind me what the plot of it is after that?
Oh, it's really crazy. I was just talking about this with my nephews, because they basically had an idea for a movie, and I'm like, that movie's been made already. And the idea was basically that and then a little boy shows up at her doorstep.
Yes.
And he basically knows all these things about her, these intimate things about her, and he's saying that I'm your husband, like I'm like the reincarnation of your husband. And she basically has like a nervous breakdown, and and it's basically just like her trying to deal with this situation, right?
Yes, I have seen that movie. Yeah. Wow, I haven't thought about that one in a long time, and I didn't remember her being in it even.
Oh, really? Wow.
Bizarre.
I mean, the movie is so much about her. I mean, there's this great scene in it for me where you basically see her like going through this gamut of emotions. She's at an opera, and the whole movie is just playing out on her face. She doesn't say a word. And I really like this type of acting where you can see what someone's thinking without them speaking. And anyway, she's really just great in that. And I think she got some award nominations, although the film did not do well. But anyway, so I used to find her to be a very, very interesting actress. And now, and this is probably just a critique of Hollywood, that basically only interesting roles for women in general are in TV. They're not in the movies. And I think that's why she's kind of transitioned to television. But I find her roles so far, the one she's picked, and even as a producer, she produces a lot of this content. I find her not that interesting in these roles, to be honest. So this is not not yet anyway, a very interesting character.
Right. Not yet. Yeah.
And potentially there might be a lot more to her. Right. So maybe there is something that appealed to her. I mean, obviously she wanted to produce the show, so maybe there was, and she could have probably played any role. Right. So she chose this role for a reason, I guess.
Yes.
I guess she does bring some, there is moments where she kind of steps into the light and she's supposed to be all ethereal. And I guess she does have that feel to her, but that's not enough of a character. Right. So hopefully there's more for her to do as the show progresses. So we get introduced to these different characters, and I guess each one of them gets to have like a one-on-one with Nicole Kidman, right? Melissa McCarthy is the first one to have one this episode, right? And we not only find out, about her fears about her career changing, but we also find out that she apparently was the victim of like one of these romance scams, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Which was funny. Like we were listening, me and Kim were listening to a podcast when she first started listening to this, and she's like, "Oh, that's happening in my book. That's happening in the book I'm reading." It happened to be this book because she was reading on vacation. But
nice little like cameo there in the flashback that she has, right? Like that's her real life husband, isn't it?
Ben Falcone. Yep, exactly.
Right.
Yeah, he always pops up. And as a matter of fact, he's directed a few of the movies she's been in. And he also always pops up like he was her love interest in Bridesmaids, for example.
Right.
So he's been in a lot of her films. Everything seems pretty straightforward at this point, right?
Yeah, I feel like this was a big, understandably so, like a setup episode of what we're going to see. And I think, by the time we got to episode 3, we were like in it. So they made a lot of progress, I think, in these 3 episodes.
That's an interesting point you bring up, is that 2 things. One is I expected, because they were dropping 3 episodes at once, that, like you said, the first episode was a lot of setup. So they probably wanted to put out more of the show to hook people in. Right.
Yeah. I mean, I felt episode 3 was really compelling. I felt so.
Yeah, and the reveal at the end of that, which I'll wait for a few more minutes before we reveal what that is, that that apparently doesn't come into play in the book until, Kim was basically getting to that point of the book right as I was getting to it in the show. So it's deep. It's deep into the book, like 2/3, 3/4 of the way through the book before that revelation comes. And when she told me that there was a twist and she didn't want to tell me what it was, I was like, I bet you whatever that twist is going to drop at the end of these 3 episodes, because it's going to be the hook to keep people coming back.
But I will just say that in the credits, they should tell us what lipstick Melissa McCarthy is wearing, because it looks fantastic on her, and I would like to know.
Wow, I didn't realize that you're having such a love affair with Melissa McCarthy.
I generally, I like her just fine. I don't love her generally. I also, I'm not the biggest fan of slapstick comedy.
Yeah.
So for that reason, a lot of her movies, I find them just fine. But here, I'm really, really liking her here.
Yeah, I like her when she doesn't play the stereotypical thing. I found her, she became a hugely successful, obviously very, very famous person, but I found her performances were getting a little tiresome for me. Like it was too much of the same thing.
Yeah.
And I did like that. And I do like when she changes up, because I do think she's a very talented actress. But one movie I want to call out, because I think it's absolutely hysterically funny, is Spy. Have you ever seen Spy? That one.
It's one of those that I think I saw it on a plane, so I can't really give it an objective opinion.
But I rarely laugh out loud, and I laughed out loud. I mean, I'll laugh out loud in the theater because, it's kind of contagious, but I rarely laugh out loud when I'm just watching something by myself. And that movie made me laugh so many times. It's very, very funny.
I will say, moving away from the Melissa McCarthy point, which I'm sure we'll return to, though, one thing that I really liked about this, in contrast to Mayor of Easttown, which I did love Mayor of Easttown, but, many times I commented to you, my God, we need to stop meeting new people. This is too much. Here, this is like a very nice confined universe, possibly due to COVID.
Right.
But it's a very nice to know that, like, I have met all the main characters, and now we're just going to see how things play out. I mean, maybe 1 or 2 more we'll meet. I don't know, but I don't have that disconcerting feeling of like, oh my gosh, I can't keep track of all these people.
Here's another really funny correlation to White Lotus and this show. Just to briefly bring it up, it's the fact that, in episode 1, somewhat similarly, we have a certain number of people, they're arriving on this resort, so there's some basic parallels there. But one behind the scene thing that does correlate here was that these shows were both produced at around the same time because they were COVID friendly.
Right.
Basically, when they were shooting White Lotus, they're like, can you shoot in Hawaii? Because they had like no COVID there.
Yeah.
You can shoot outdoors at all times. So, you don't have to worry about quarantining people. And most of the scenes are scene partners like they are here.
Yes.
So you can imagine if you on White Lotus that the family has to shoot scenes together, like they're really not interacting with 25 other people per day. They're only really interacting with a very small group of people. So you could kind of keep, any kind of outbreak theoretically would be in just a part of the cast. So you could keep shooting while those people are quarantined, let's say, and then you can pick up their scenes later on, right? So it was just and I think very similarly here, once again, you're shooting outdoors, you are in a place where there's very little COVID. And if someone got sick, because most of the time you're having these scenes with scene partners. I mean, we did have some a bunch of group scenes in the 3rd episode, but you could imagine if they happen to have an outbreak, then it'd be like, hey, whoever's not sick today, we'll shoot all your scenes and we'll just pick up the other scenes later on.
Although
it's not 80 people we need for the cast.
No, that's true.
Structurally so far is that one day is one episode. So the first day is their arrival. And then we see the shot again of the smoothies, of course. So it's the blender going again, and they're all getting their custom smoothies. And wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Everybody has to only have their own smoothies.
Yes.
Don't share your smoothies. They're specially concocted for your, health requirements and your goals. Like some people want to lose weight. Some people want mental tranquility or whatever. So they supposedly have formulated this. And right away, did you get a red flag right away? I got a red flag right away when I heard that.
Oh, of course. And also, just speaking practically, if I'm out and about with my family or friends, like, oh, yours looks good, let me taste it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Of requires some discipline too. But yes, for sure, there's something going on there.
Well, what's funny is that, once again, in the book, I haven't read the book, but I did run this by Kim. And I already actually knew the answer to this before I even asked her, which was, I said, did they have any kind of speech like that in the book? And she goes, no, they don't speak to each other, and they're not really supposed to interact that much for the first 5 days. So I'm like, so yeah, they're not during the detox. No one's sharing food because they're not even talking to each other. So,
and then
you're not going to just grab someone's drink when you can't speak to them. Yeah. If you're hanging out together, sure, but.
And that's a good point. That would be really freaky, right? If someone did that to you, but
just ran over, picked up your drink and started drinking it.
Put that together with the fact that they seem to be like taking blood every opportunity they can get from everybody. Sit still in one place too long, and the phlebotomist will come up.
Exactly. Although that doesn't make sense, I could imagine something like that if you are, like, let's say you're on a special diet, or you are like on, like they used to have like those old, derogatory term here for anybody. I don't mean this derogatory way, but like the old fat farms, quote unquote, that they would send people to lose weight. Sometimes like Hollywood actresses and stuff would have to go spend time, and then they would be like checking their, they would put them on crazy diets, and then they would have to check them on a regular basis. So it makes kind of sense. But I can imagine, like, if you're there to like whatever, get like to meditate more with your family, it's like, why are you taking my blood all the time? Right. I'm not on any kind of diet restrictions. Like what's happening? Yeah. So I was immediately like, oh, like I had kind of suspected that there's something going on with those shakes. Luke Evans' character, Lars. So yeah, let's get into a little bit about his mystery. He has not surrendered his phone, or I guess he surrendered his phone, but he still has a smartwatch, an Apple phone or something. He's socked it away like in the woods.
Right.
And he has been, is he sending an email, or is that just notes he's taking when he's like, at one point he's like saying things about Masha. He's kind of almost like doing a review of the first day. Is that something that he's texting to someone, emailing somebody, or is that just notes that he's taking? Can you get a feel for that?
It wasn't clear to me at all. I'm not sure, to be honest.
So for some reason, I read it as if he was actually speaking to someone, like he's like leaking information, and then he's interrupted by, I think, a boyfriend, maybe. Like that's not even clear either.
They're definitely,
they were involved at some point, right?
Yes, they're definitely an ex-boyfriend. Yes.
And apparently he seems like he's the bad guy. The boyfriend kind of seems like, anyway, once again, it's all kind of ambiguous, but it seems like he has done something that pushed this guy away, right? So he's in, and you could see that, he is very, by the way, this is what's notable about the scene. He's basically like antagonistic to everybody he speaks to, but he does seem to be ingratiating himself with this guy. So I guess he's trying to make amends, possibly, considering that he's not nice to anybody else on the show for any reason.
I mean, I thought he was nice to the daughter.
Yes, they do have a friendship. No, I take that back. Yes, the two of them start to bond. That's correct. Yeah. So while he's doing this, nefarious, note taking or whatever communications he's doing on the side, he gets caught by Zoe, and the daughter with Napoleon is the father, and Heather is the mother's name of the couple. And they start to bond. She like basically catches him. She like teases him about it. And then he likes that she kind of has that sense of humor. And they do, you're right. They actually start to form a friendship. So that seems to be the only, only person there.
Yes.
I mean, as a matter of fact, not only is he not friendly with anybody else, he's openly antagonistic to just about everybody else, right? He mocks them all for what, like he literally identifies what they're there for, and then he mocks them about it. So it's pretty cruel behavior on his part. Yeah. But he does get along with Zoe, and that's actually an important scene there, that she catches him, and so she knows that he's doing this, and she doesn't rat him out or anything. Although they do find out eventually, and take away his phone, and he's not happy. Mm-hmm. And what else happens in that second episode? That's not when they do. Is that when they do they dig the graves? Is that the episode?
Yeah, I believe it is. Yeah. Okay, so my personal nightmare would be being forced to dig my own grave, lay down in it, and have someone throw dirt on me. I think I would actually have a full-on nervous breakdown.
This is a really uncomfortable scene, because not only because, just you having to dig your own grave and then lay in it, which is problematic enough. Although we do see it's Tony, right, who goes back to the grave. Is that Tony?
I believe so. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So that's interesting to see that. But also it's the fact that, and I guess we'll get into it now, but we find out that the trauma that Heather and Napoleon and Zoe are going through is that not only that was it 3 years ago, 3 years prior, on his 18th birthday,
the day before his 18th birthday,
the day before his 18th birthday, correct, that the Zoe's twin brother committed suicide on his birthday. And it seemed to be unexpected from what the family is saying so far anyway. And of course, this is very traumatic for them to kind of be directly addressing. And of all the people, everybody's kind of uncomfortable with this. Some people take it seriously, some people don't take it so seriously. But the family seems to be upset about this for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess actually, I thought this was at the end of episode 2, but I actually guess it's the end of episode 1, which is when they're in that circle.
Mm-hmm.
And where Masha is talking about that, like how they're, basically talking about death actually, and like confronting them all with it. And Heather gets very mad at Masha.
Yes.
And then Masha, and then she said to Masha, if basically, are you trying to F with us? And Masha's like, I'm trying to F with all of you.
Yes.
So apparently she's like, that's what you're here for. And so that happens. Because I realized that happens before, because it's the burial, which is in episode 2. So that they're really harping on this this death thing. So and of course, I guess the intention is like some kind of tough love for this family to get over this. I assume that these activities are structured to for these people. And I guess I'll mention that here now too, is that it seems to be that Masha is like profiling these people and putting them together, right?
Right. It's a specially assembled group. Yes.
And I actually just thought about this today when I was saying out loud 9 perfect strangers. And I think that she's like saying we need all of them. It's not going to work without all of them.
Yes.
And I think that it's like a recipe, right? It's like the blender, right?
Yeah.
I think that she's saying 9 perfect strangers because there's that terminology, perfect strangers, in that we don't know each other. We're perfect strangers. But I think she's saying these are 9 perfect strangers. Like they are
for each other.
Perfect together. Exactly. So I think there's something that they're trying to concoct here. A smoothie they're trying to make out of this group.
Yes.
Hopefully not literally. That could be the final twist.
A trauma smoothie. Yeah.
Exactly. But so there's a lot of this kind of direct confrontation with death, and of course that most directly pertains to this really tragic story. And how do you feel about like the family, their interactions, and the performances here, just in general with that storyline?
I think it was really well done. I think it is a very realistic thing to have one person here, the mom in a couple, having dealt with death, of family members in my relationship. I think it's, very realistic to have one person who is full on confronting everything, feeling all her feelings.
Right.
And the other trying to be strong, right? Because they can't both break down at the same time. So, somebody's got to keep it going. Somebody's got to be the stable force. So the other person to close off those emotions, because first of all, it's so painful to confront it. And second, because practically speaking, it's just not a good idea for both people to be in that dark place at the same time. Right. But of course, like that doesn't make it any less real, and it doesn't mean that you're not experiencing the trauma just because you're not allowing yourself to have that experience. You're still going through it, and you can only push it away for so long before you're forced to confront it for one reason or another. So all of that seemed very realistic to me. And the daughter also, having, I can't even imagine what it is to lose a sibling, right. Never mind lose a twin.
Right.
Like your other half, right, yep. is gone. Yep. So all of this seemed to me a very realistic dynamic.
Yeah, I actually like this part of the show. I'm not as engaged with the show as you are, but one of the things that keeps me going. I'm just intrigued in general to kind of what they're going to do with it. I don't know if they're really going to land it, but I am curious to see what they're going to try to do with it. But I think that of the things that work for me, the best in the show is this family. And of course, they're the ones who've probably been most fleshed out, because I liked that I kind of had an expectation of what the interactions were going to be. But I liked by the time we get to the 3rd episode, I like how it's all become more complex it might be in this episode itself where we see the mother, standing at the edge of a cliff. And there's actually a very good scene where one of the, her guide, I guess everybody has like someone assigned to them to be their guide, kind of holds their hands. And there's actually a great piece of dialogue, by the way. I don't know if it's from the book, from the writing staff of the show. I should actually track it down, because I really liked that bit of dialogue about how, holding hands is so intimate. I thought that was a very good piece of writing, that she basically comes to calm her down, to make sure she's not seriously contemplating suicide there. But what's interesting is then that episode kind of reveals that apparently she has had suicidal episodes, and maybe the son also had, inherited this potentially. So now there's some kind of guilt possibly that she feels. But then the daughter has this great confrontation, being like, I'm okay. You guys are the ones who are messed up. Like, stop trying to fix me. You guys are the ones who are, still not dealing with this. Right. And so I thought that was, basically, I'm always like when I kind of don't get what I expect. And like I said, I kind of had a very stereotypical expectation for what was going to happen. And those interactions weren't part of it. And it gets even more so when we see, what happens to the dad in the next episode. Right.
Yes.
But I liked all that stuff. Like, to your point, I liked, all the directions that all those interactions went. Yeah, so they have that that burial scene, which obviously traumatizes everybody. But some people just like, Melissa McCarthy does not seem to be taking it. Frances doesn't seem to be taking it that seriously. She kind of just wants to, doesn't want to get dirty. That's her big concern. And while some of the other folks are kind of just going with it, like Luke Evans, like Lars' character, he seems to just be like whatever. He just does, he does whatever, just gives it a shot, sees how it goes. And I do think that Jessica, right, Samara Weaving's character, that she does seem to she seems to be trying to have this some revelations there, and actually she discusses it in the next episode when they go on that forging expedition, I should say. Who has a one-on-one? Oh, it's Jessica has the one-on-one with Masha, that episode, right? And she's like talking about all these different things, but then Masha basically says what you really are concerned with. She goes like, why doesn't he love me anymore? Right. So her real concern is about the relationship with her husband. Right. So we kind of get to the bottom of that. We didn't feel like they were they were in the best of places before, but I guess that just makes it explicit, I should say, in that confrontation with Masha. That reminds me of another scene from episode 1. What do you make of that sequence where we see Michael Shannon, Napoleon, go to
the hot springs,
and then they have that kind of, he's talking way too much, and he's, it's a pretty funny scene. But then there's that moment where he kind of like checks her out a little too hard, and the husband reacts. Like, what purpose do you think that scene is doing in the show? Because it's kind of weird at that moment to have that whole interaction.
Yeah, good question. I don't really know. I thought maybe this scene was just telling us about the awkwardness of his character, right? Because first of all, if you come up upon a couple in the hot springs, you kind of, at least I would conclude they're trying to have a romantic moment here. And even if I had my heart set on the hot springs, I'm going to have to come back later because I don't want to be the third wheel in that situation. But he just makes himself at home. And even talks about how awkward he can be sometimes and how he's constantly stepping in it. So I kind of just thought as maybe an extension of his awkwardness. And there are references, right, to later in the series about how he and his wife have not really been having sex.
Right.
So maybe, it's kind of on his mind. And, maybe also to show that whatever's going on between Jessica and her husband, there is still something there where he's protective of her and, cares about their relationship, maybe, although, for some guys that would just be ego anyway and wouldn't necessarily speak to how they feel about their partner, I think.
I think right at the beginning of episode 3, by the way, they have a very awkward sex scene, which is pretty funny. That whole conversation, which I'm not going to go into here because it's pretty explicit.
Yeah,
but it was pretty funny. Like talking about the standards of expectation.
It was funny. Yes. I thought like a strange conversation though for a married couple to have, because you think you kind of know where the other stood on that issue. But yeah, it was very funny.
Well, maybe you never had to have that conversation before, right? So
yeah, maybe.
So I think that pretty much wraps up episode 2. They go
Well,
on.
I'll just
Please.
backpedal for 1 second that we
Please
do
do.
have the very humorous choking on a grape scene.
Oh my goodness, absolutely. Totally forgot about that. And I almost brought it up all the way at the beginning of our conversation and then forgot it here. But yeah, go ahead. Go into it.
Yeah, I mean, it really was, Melissa McCarthy is trying to relax, and she, in fact, is so relaxed that she's fallen asleep. And Francis and Bobby Cannavale just eating his grapes, I guess, thinks, and I would never have this thought process, but thinks, I wonder if I could make that shot.
Yeah.
And shoots the grape right into her mouth and ends up having to Heimlich her. And I mean, it is kind of infuriating that somebody would put you in that situation when you're unconscious, but she seems to deal with it fairly well, considering it was like a near-death experience. So, and as he says, I could take that shot all day. It was never going to go in, but it did. So,
I like how they play the whole thing out too, where it's like literally his first attempt. It's not even like he's just doing it to pass the time. It's like just like a random, like, let me just try this. And it goes right in. She starts choking to death.
And he tries to play it off. I don't know.
God, him trying to play it off is the funniest thing, where she goes, is that a grape? And he's just like, where did these grapes come from? And it's like a pile of grapes. He's trying to play it off like, I don't know where those grapes could have possibly come from. It's like, you mean the giant pile over there? So yeah, and then they're basically in the pool together because she just doesn't like the physical activity in general. And he has, pain, and he doesn't have his pain meds with him. They took his pain meds away. So he's basically just like, I'm not going to put myself through any of these physical activities. But also in episode 2, before we move on to episode 3, also in episode 2, we do finally find out Nicole Kidman's backstory, which in the book is the opening sequence of the book. And not as dramatic, by the way. There's no shooting in the book.
Okay.
But we find out, according to Nicole Kidman, reveals to the rest of the folks that she had a near-death experience, that she had been a corporate CEO. Also in the book, the same thing. And in the book, she simply has like a heart attack. She just, has some kind of stress-related episode of some kind. In the show, apparently, she made the wrong kind of enemy. And someone tried to kill her, shot her in a parking lot. And then basically the EMT showed up to rescue her. And Yao, the Manny Jacinto's character, was one of the people, the paramedic who saved her. And they've, we don't know exactly how, but they've been bonded since then. And he actually is working with her here on this. And he's basically her right-hand man. Her main assistant, and he is in a relationship with Delilah, the Tiffany Boone's character, and they basically are the two most prevalent, most important partners to Masha. They really keep this place operational. And Tiffany Boone, I should say, Delilah was the one who, when I was mentioning that Heather was kind of standing on that precipice and maybe contemplating suicide, which potentially she has contemplated before. She's the one that kind of went there and soothed her by holding her hand and kind of talking her through it.
But also there is still something weird going on between Masha and Yao, because you see that scene in the swimming pool where he says that Delilah is jealous and doesn't really understand their relationship. And she says, we'll always be connected because of that experience, which all of that is well and good. But then she starts, kissing his legs, right? Which is kind of intimate. So I'm not entirely sure what the whole deal is there.
Well, I got the impression there when she was saying that she had to learn to share. I assume that they were still having an intimate relationship of some kind. And I mentioned this to Kim also. And apparently in the book, it's the same. So that I think that he's basically, physically involved with both of them still, I believe.
Okay.
And I think I assumed the same thing from seeing their interaction. And that's why she was talking about, I think when he was talking about them being uncomfortable still, and she goes, well, you have to make her feel loved. I don't think she was just talking about, like her being jealous because they have this connection. I felt like it was probably a physical relationship that was still ongoing, like a romantic triangle of some kind.
Oh, and you know what we didn't discuss?
What's that?
This is how disinterested we are in this whole Nicole Kidman thing. The text messages she's been receiving.
Yeah. I was gonna throw that out there because I think that's like the cliffhanger on the last episode, right? In
the first episode, she gets the text of like, "This is your last week on Earth" or something like that.
Oh, that was probably the I was trying to think about what, each one of these episodes has kind of had like a button at the end. I was trying to think of what the button was. That might have been the button on the first episode, was her getting this text message saying this is like basically your last.
Yes.
And yeah, so that actually ties into these conversations she starts having with the staff, because she is trying to figure out who might be sending these text messages. And, she has a list of possible suspects. She goes, it could be her ex-husband. It could be apparently there's somebody that had a bad experience at the resort, and the family is suing her. And that's important, I think, is the family's doing it, right? So did the person not survive potentially, right? So anyway, so that's a possibility, she says, as well. And then like, I guess, she also was shot at. I mean, and at least in the context of the show, someone tried to kill her previously. So maybe it's the same person again.
Right.
So that there's those aspects to it, which I think also is invented for the show. So maybe they're just trying to add a little more drama here. In the midst of all this, we see Frances is basically wanting to bail. And this is when we see Masha talking to the staff, and basically saying like, we need to accelerate things, and
change the protocol.
That's right, or a new protocol, right? They're experimenting with a new
or
protocol.
move to protocol 2, something like that.
Right.
Yeah.
And Delilah is very concerned about this change of protocol. And I think at this point, it's pretty explicit. I don't know if at this point the show is still playing peekaboo with the fact that they're being drugged, but I think it's pretty explicit at this point, if not within very early the next episode. But Masha is basically saying, we have to accelerate things because we need all of them. We can't let Frances leave. And apparently she thinks that if she accelerates this process, that then that will kind of get them to stay if they start seeing more results. And Delilah is not on board with this. She thinks it's dangerous, and she says they're not detoxed yet. They need to detox further before. And I guess that kind of goes back to them taking all those blood tests, like you mentioned before. And then I guess that leads us to episode 3, and we have a very uncomfortable, very uncomfortable breakfast sequence here. You have a few things happen here. One is you see that Tony, Bobby Cannavale's character, is annoyed that he doesn't have his drugs. And they do bring him one pill in the morning, but he feels like it's not sufficient. And I guess if he's popping these all day, maybe they cut his dosage down because they want to detox him. Or maybe he's just having way fewer of these than he normally does. So either way, he's going to be in a lot of pain. And they have their smoothies, in the morning with a new concoction in them. So they start to almost instantly start having reactions to these. And they're, as part of this accelerated detox, they tell them they're all going to go foraging, but this is kind of an excuse to just keep them from eating all day long. Because the goal seems to be to keep them occupied at all costs and not allow them to eat anything at all. So, but they do end up eating something by the end of the episode. And early on, spoiler alert, early on in the episode, we see that Masha has a pet goat that she apparently is very affectionate for. I guess we have no explanation as to why she's so attached to this thing, I guess, right? We just get introduced to it at the beginning of this episode, I believe. And then it will turn up by the end of the episode again.
Yep, Chekhov's goat.
Chekhov's goat, that's right. And then Chekhov's goat, that's a good one. And then they wrap up.
I think she gets another text message too, right? While she's with the goat.
Oh, yes.
Saying, she goes for you, something like that.
Yeah, she goes to dive off. We see her dive, I think, at the very beginning of the episode, right after she meets the goat. Then she goes for a dive off of a very high cliff, and which is interesting because she runs up to a cliff when she gets the first text message. Then she dives off of this cliff, and then someone basically records her doing this and sends it to her as a text later. And so it's someone stalking her, obviously. And she still doesn't know who it is because anonymous texts are coming in anonymously. And, she even suggested earlier that she can, potentially go to the police, but they don't think that police are going to help them. I guess they've had some bad interactions with the police before, just don't trust them for whatever reasons. After that, we have this tense breakfast that goes on with not only, is Bobby Cannavale on edge because he's not taking his meds, but on top of that, you have Lars is, once again, needling everybody at the table.
Antagonizing everyone, yes.
Yeah. And literally at that point, Carmel, Regina Hall's character, leaps across the table.
Yes.
It tries to strangle him. So this is not the best way to start the day.
Yeah.
But then they do have this potato sack race, which, Yao tells them, you shouldn't skip this one. Everybody loves this, everybody's favorite activity. But it seems that since there's 9 of them, they kind of almost know that someone's going to bail out, and that it turns out to be Francis again bails out on this. So which gives them a nice 4-and-4, like a team building exercise. And we start seeing some of those, well, maybe not Bobby Cannavale, right? Because he's been kind of paired up with Francis up until now, but we kind of see these duos breaking up or forming, I should say, in these during the contest. And then they have this kind of fun potato sack race, right? And Jessica wins it by doing cartwheels. I'm not sure if that actually is a faster way to accomplish that feat, by the way.
Well, I think you're going to cover more ground faster. So, right, because you don't have to make those little jumps. You can use your arm span to get some distance.
And I guess you get momentum going too, right? So.
Yeah, as well. Yeah. So I don't, strangely believable to me that this would work.
So yeah, with her interesting technique, she wins the and then this is kind of where Tony gives away his who he is, because he celebrates. And this is when we finally find out, or soon thereafter, we find out that he was a tight end.
Right.
Was it for the Jets? Like, I think they may actually use an actual team. I forget
the team.
I think they actually used an actual team, but I can't remember which one it was. But basically it was a tight end, his knees got shattered during a tackle.
Yes.
And basically he's been on meds. And it's not just that he's addicted to the painkillers. I think he also is somebody who kind of was great at something, was famous for that thing, was exceptional at it. And then he just doesn't have an identity anymore minus that thing. And maybe that is why he is become a good match for Frances. He even tells that to her, right? That he's like saying that, at one point he explicitly says that after she finds out his true identity, he basically says the same thing to her, going like, look, I went through what you did, right? Where, you're known for something and you just, you just have to get over it. So I think that's kind of how they're, I think there's going to be, smoothies, blends made of these characters. And then maybe that's the intention of the show. And I think that's kind of maybe how they are going to align. But so he celebrates after the winning the potato sack race. And then they go on this forage. And supposedly they're going to have plenty to eat as they go foraging. Yes. And they find nothing. They find some nuts. They find one avocado.
Right, because it's too early in the season.
That's right.
For all of the fruit trees that they were promised, which certainly the staff had to know that.
And then we have 2 main sequences, maybe the 2 main sequences, character events of the show so far, which is the women going on their forage, and they end up at a at a pond or a pool. Some of them go skinny dipping, right? That's Delilah goes skinny dipping, and that encourages Heather to go as well. And the rest of the women, I don't think any of the other women go skinny dipping, but they all go and they kind of start to reveal themselves to each other, right? So what did you think about this sequence?
I really liked here the interaction between Carmel and Jessica.
Yeah.
Where, first of all, Jessica has that impulse of seeing something really beautiful, and she's doing that gesture of like feeling her pockets. Where's my phone? Where's my phone? I want to take a picture, which I am not an influencer, and I have done the same thing. So, so I think that's just kind of become part of our society, is trying to record things, even if not for other people, just for ourselves, right? So, but first of all, she's already made the comment to Jessica earlier when, she says, where did you learn to do that? I was a cheerleader. Gee, she says, and Carmel says, and rolls her eyes, right? So she's already expressed this disdain from Jessica, which, though, a person that's not that sharp might let that comment fly by, I think.
Right.
And, not recognize the sarcasm and disdain in it. But we realized later that Jessica did pick up on that. And then later, she's feeling for her phone, and Carmel makes the sarcastic, like, if you can't put it on social media, it didn't happen, right? With like an eye roll type of thing. And, Jessica finally reaches her limit and says, F off. So, or go F yourself, or something to that effect.
Right.
So all of that just seems like, everyone's kind of on edge and bizarrely hungry, even though they haven't been eating. It's not like they've gone days without eating, but everyone's hangry. So
exactly.
So, kind of excuse it. But then when they're all sitting together, Carmel has this moment of honesty about why she dislikes Jessica. And because, she had previously said that she quit her job on Broadway when she got married and got pregnant because her husband didn't want the kids raised by the nanny. And then you find out that the husband left her for a younger woman, and Jessica is like the embodiment, right, of all of that. And that's where this anger towards Jessica is coming from. And she does feel apologetic about it. And I thought that was really nicely done.
I think she also feels apologetic, I think, because Jessica kind of reveals herself first, right? Where she's talking about how she's almost like admiring of all these women and like finds them beautiful.
Right. I forgot about that. Yes.
She kind of like, and they're like, what are you talking about? Like, you're so beautiful. And she can't appreciate her own beauty. Yeah. But I like the way that all played out between them. Oh, and it was pretty interesting was Heather and her daughter's interactions were also very good. I like how she's like, this is, very much like a parenting type thing where her mother's like, she's like reacting to like, oh, mom, I don't want to see you naked. Yes. And the mom's like, kind of like, telling her daughter like, oh, you should show your body. It's so beautiful. And she's like, ew, mom.
Yes, which is very realistic, right?
Exactly. Because like, yeah, your parents always.
With your parents, that is horrifying.
Exactly. And it's exactly how that relationship is, right? Where like you're, you as a teenager, especially, I mean, she's 21 now, supposedly, according to the show, but she's, like basically an adolescent practically, that she's like, oh my God, like you do not want to see your parents in any kind of like sexual context.
Yes.
And then of course, like as a parent, you're like, you think you own the kid, right? You've seen this child from birth, right? So
yes.
But it's very funny. That interaction is very real. And it seems that the meds are having a very strong reaction on Heather seems to be having the strongest reaction to the meds at this point. Meanwhile, these women are having this kind of very beautiful, kind of gentle interaction. Yeah, it's a very strong bonding event. And I guess the men are bonding too, but in a very different way. They're all very angry for not having food. And as a matter of fact, they stumble upon that goat. And then the tight end, Tony. Oh, by the way, because this is an Australian book set in Australia, he's a rugby player
makes sense.
In the original book. But anyway, so Tony, basically he maybe because of the meds or whatever, but he is able to put on his moves, and he's actually able to like catch the goat, which is no small feat, especially if you have a bad knee. But
he still got his moves. Yep.
And we assume when he shows up at the end of the show with the goat draped over his shoulders that he's the one who had killed the goat, but we find out later on that he wasn't the one who killed the goat. And I guess I'll save that for the last scene. But they, the women show up and they're all like, what a lovely, relaxing day. Yes. And the men show up and they're like, we killed something. So the women are kind of like, oh my God, like what's going on over there? So,
and I did like Masha's bit of like, acting completely unfazed to their faces, but then when she turns around, you see on her face, she's like, what on earth?
And she's also upset about it, right? Because it turns out that's not only like she's kind of like, maybe this thing's off the rails, but it's her goat, right? It's her kid.
Mm-hmm.
But before that, before the things get violent with the men, they do have a few revelations of their own. This is when they finally confront him about his identity as the tight end for that team. So now they realized who he was, and then he talks about how he kind of felt lost after he lost this thing that he was so good at, and then we also discover. Once again, Lars is not telling us anything, so we still don't know what his backstory is. We're still waiting to find that out. But we do find out from Ben that he, kind of the opposite of what, Tony's talking about, not someone who like achieved something and then lost it, that Ben, on the other hand, won the lottery. And he just has everything he wants, but it is empty to him because he feels like he, like he basically got something without earning it, right? So I think that is his onus that he's carrying.
I was wondering, was it clear to you whether he met his wife before or after he won the lottery?
It's not clear, but I have a suspicion that he is having this kind of like, oh, I'm rich, I get whatever I want. And now he might be including his wife in that. And that might be,
it all feels empty.
Yeah. So that might be what the underlying issue with the wife is, possibly. It's my guess, but I don't think that they explained that. But I mean, if he was working at, I'm assuming, if she was, she's attractive and she was an influencer. I don't know if she was before she met him or not, but it's very possible that he, only met her because he was
Right.
some rich guy hanging out at these
Right.
clubs and buying drinks for everybody, etc. And then like now he might feel like that whole relationship is tainted in a way, right? Possibly.
Right.
So, but yeah, we don't know all the details of that, but we do know that he has this kind of emptiness in his life because he feels like he has everything he wants, but didn't earn it. So that makes him feel lesser.
Right.
Which is an interesting psychology to explore. And I'm sure we'll get into it more because we haven't really had those one-on-ones with him yet. Yeah. And then then the whole sequence happens with the goat. And like you said, Nicole Kidman plays it off great. She's like all like, oh, well done. That's exactly what I wanted. And of course, she not only turns around and goes like, oh my God, this might be off the rails, but she apparently had an emotional connection to this animal.
Yes.
But then they prepare it. They prepare it like a luau, right?
Yeah.
There's that great shot of the goat like completely opened up, like
eek on the spit. Yeah.
And it's hilarious because that's exactly how you would prepare it. But I like the reaction that everybody kind of being like, oh, I eat meat, but I just don't expect to see it.
And I am 100% of that camp. I don't even feel comfortable with chicken on the bone. Like I don't want it to resemble anything like what it looked like when it was alive. So I get the hypocrisy of it, and I get the feeling behind it.
But then they have a big luau. They have a big meal, which might not be great for their current protocol. Who knows? But and then there's two big things that happen here. One is that there's a character beat, and then the other one is kind of like the cliffhanger for the rest of the show. But the first one is that we see Napoleon, Michael Shannon's character, that he basically finally has this emotional breakthrough. Oh, by the way, I skipped it, that this is his one-on-one episode with Masha. And in that episode, she actually does something very clever, by the way, where she tells him to think of his son. And he's like, oh, I'm not going to do that. And she goes, oh, think of anything you want to. Think of a teapot, think of whatever you want to think of. But of course, she knows he's going to think of his son now because she incepted in his mind, right?
Yes.
And then he has this kind of moment and he gets uncomfortable and leaves. But then he finally has this breakthrough moment when he's at the luau where he kind of is blaming himself to just be like, if I just gotten up at the same time, he was up all night watching movies with his son the day before his birthday. And he just hit the snooze bar because he's like, who cares? I'm going to sleep in tonight. I'm tired. And it's exactly the type of thing, right? Where you think back on yourself, like and maybe there was nothing he could have done, right? And he even blames himself because he literally earlier on was mentioning how, or actually, I guess it's in this same speech, he mentions that sometimes when teenagers, he's obviously done a lot of reading on this, have this impulse to commit suicide. It's like a flashing, a passing moment, a fleeting thought. And it never comes back again. So on the one hand, you could say, oh, well, if he was really going to do this, then he was really going to do this. But in his mind, he's probably saying like, what if this was just a fleeting thing? And if I had just been there that morning to wake him up, then it wouldn't have happened then. And if I had avoided it, then it never would have happened at all. Right. And then
it's the idea that he says about people who fail at suicide. When you ask them what their thought was immediately after the attempt, they say that they thought, oh my God, what have I done? Right. And so that if he had intercepted it somehow, right at that precise moment, he would have had that, oh my God, what was I trying to really do here? And it would have never come back, that feeling.
Right. I think you're absolutely correct. I think that when he starts talking, it sounds like he's saying random things, but I think you're absolutely correct. On the one hand, he's saying, what if, like, basically he's asking himself out loud, what if this was a passing, fleeting thought? Yeah. And if I had, prevented him from having that thought that day, it wouldn't have happened at all. And then, like you said, what if, on the other hand, I walked in and he was doing it, but because I got there just in time to rescue him, then he would have had that thought in his mind, like, oh my God, what have I done? And then because he was interrupted, he would never do it again. So once again, he's like, I could have been there to stop this. Right. And anyways, it's a very powerful scene.
I mean, the pain of that, right? Because you never will know the answer.
Absolutely.
And practically speaking, he could be right. Right. Like, it may have, in all of the alternate universes that could exist, it may have ended out that way. And to feel that way as a parent, especially, I mean, I can't even imagine.
Yeah, exactly. It's all very, very tragic. Yeah. And then, they have this breakthrough and Heather and him seem to be bonding, and it seems to be a very healing moment. And then Heather, sharp as she is, she's like, wait a second, I had that whole weird emotional, like, she's like, I've never, I've struggled with depression, and suddenly I'm like sitting here with these women being like, I'm having the most wonderful experience of my life. And now my husband is suddenly having this breakthrough at dinner. Mm-hmm. And she turns to Masha and goes, hold on a second. Are you medicating us? Mm-hmm. And then dun, dun, dun.
Yeah.
To be continued.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely am interested to see what happens next, for sure.
Yeah, I'm curious to be like, if this revelation happens, like, are they all just going to, I mean, theoretically, they could all just bail right now, but I guess they don't, because there's 5 more episodes of the show. so I am curious to see what happens.
Pretty safe assumption, yeah.
By the way, that does seem like a big cheat to me. I got to tell you that, if I was on board with this, even if this is going to be like one of these, like, they have those those men's getaways where you have like the primal screaming and stuff, and you come to terms with, like, if they're like, oh, by the way, you had all those breakthroughs because we drugged you the whole time. I'm like, isn't that cheating? Come on, like, is your program just getting us drugged up? It doesn't really.
You know what? But what about that whole idea of, like, I'm going to say it wrong, ayahuasca, something like that.
Yeah.
And like the American Indian idea of like sweat lodges. And I mean, it's not without precedent, the idea that by altering your brain chemistry, you can experience these breakthroughs, right?
Oh no, absolutely not. I mean, as a matter of fact, like LSD was originally like proven back in the 1950s to be like a cure for, psychosis and depression and, all these different neuroses. And that's what they were investigating it for. And then like the whole war on drugs and the hippie movement and stuff, made it a dirty word. But right now there are multiple places where you can go, overseas mostly, but here in the US and some places as well, where you can actually go on like a guided trip. And these people are, having huge breakthroughs in like, chronic people who have like lifelong bouts of depression who are cured. So I'm not saying that this wouldn't work. My concern is if I go on a peyote trip or something, like I am opting into that. Someone's not dosing me.
Yeah.
Someone's not dosing me in my breakfast. Like,
yeah, that's fair.
That's what I signed up for.
Print. I feel like people didn't read. That release just got shoved in front of them. I mean, people seem kind of confused by like, no, you agreed to give up your phone. So it could have been in there.
True. It could be in there. That's true. They're going to be maybe they are being dosed with LSD, by the way. They seem to be having psychedelic experiences. So maybe it
could be.
Who knows? Maybe that will be the I don't know. I have a feeling that they probably have like more specific concoctions than that. But yeah, anyway, if I found out that I was just being dosed the whole time, I would be a little bit annoyed. I mean, now if that was if that was the pitch, I'm not necessarily against it.
It's a valid point. It's a valid point you're making. Yeah.
But yeah. So where do you think, I'm sure there are plenty of spoilers out there because this is a book that exists. Although from what Kim is telling me, the book is pretty drastically
different from this,
what we're seeing here. Mm-hmm. But what do you expect near term, long term, kind of where are we going with all this?
I always struggle with this because the part of watching it to me is just like enjoying it as I see it and not speculating all that much. So I don't really have any hypotheses right now as far as where it's going. I'm concerned that it's going to take a left turn into something too bizarre for me. Like I want it to stay kind of at this level of revealing things about people and whatever. I don't want there to be some like, and then it turns out there's a coven of witches and then like that kind of thing. I hope it stays on this level of just discovering more about the inner workings of these people. But there is something to the idea, right, where she's like, it has to be this particular group of 9 people. And so something's going to happen. What do you think?
First of all, to your original point, I actually am enjoying it purely as it is. And I don't think it's going to be that outlandish. I think it's going to be pretty, I think it's going to be pretty down to earth. And I'm pretty sure that as far as, I mean, I'm sure there'll be more drama, but I don't think there's going to be anything like supernatural or anything crazy like that going on, especially because of the source material. Although
Yes, that's a fair point. Yeah.
But this is why I said, although that apparently like Big Little Lies didn't have a murder mystery in it, but they threw the murder mystery in there to, once again, you have to throw one of those in there to make to be a hook. So it's possible that this has been restructured enough to put in more elements to like, I think the stalker thing is not in the books, for example.
Right.
So maybe there is going to be some additional heightening that, for a TV audience. But I think at its core, I think it's really going to be about these folks. Although I do think there's something more here. I don't think it's nefarious. I don't think she's trying to like blackmail all of them or whatever, because then she could let some people go. I think she is legitimately trying to, like you were saying, like, she has some theory that these people together, based on whatever system she's devised in the community itself, right? So like I said, whether they're going to explicitly have Masha in the next episode assign them somebody, or whether they're going to pick each other, and they've already kind of started to form pairs. I think that's part of her formula, right? Is to have these people like kind of have, ownership of each other. And that's part of this healing process. But I think that's about it. I don't think that there's going to be some kind of crazy extraterrestrial or some kind of government experiment going on or something. I don't think.
Right.
I don't think it's going to be that dramatic. But I'm enjoying it. Like, honestly, it's like kind of like a vacation, right? I'm just kind of just chilling out and listening to these people talk and getting to know them a little bit. And that's my engagement with the show. The stakes are very, very low for me.
Yes, I agree with that.
In a good way.
But I do feel it's, to bring this all the way full circle, I feel like it's higher stakes than I had in White Lotus.
I agree and disagree. I thought that with White Lotus, thematically, the stakes are much higher for White Lotus. But I agree that, like, from a character perspective, these characters aren't like, their stories aren't interlocking. I have a feeling, for example, that very much so in this show, in Nine Perfect Strangers specifically, that I think that it's about their interactions with each other. It's about the people they become at the end of this. And it's and like that Masha's plan, whether it's successful or not. I mean, potentially we've seen in the past from some of these clues that things have gone badly before, but that her philosophy is that these people are like healing each other through these interactions with each other, right? That they collectively are forming a community. Whereas I felt like White Lotus is very different. That White Lotus, it's like upstairs, downstairs, like those British type movies, where it's like a metaphor for society and how like each layer of this society is privileged and how they like impose this privilege on each other. And there's always someone like lower down on that totem pole. And it's just basically a microcosm of culture, right? And it's not about like each one of these people, getting to the heart of their character or something, right? It's really just about like us witnessing this, how everybody in White Lotus, now I'm talking about how everybody in that chain of command, they all do terrible things to each other. And they all are still fundamentally human people who are just trying to make the best of their specific situation, right? And I think that's kind of what we're seeing there, which is very different than I think the intentions between White Lotus and this show. And so that's why I'm surprised that there were all these comparisons. The intentions between these two shows I find very different. I do not think that they have, like I said, other than the framing device, that it's like, it goes one day at a time, very similar in that regard. It's a bunch of people showing up, strangers showing up together, and then having these interactions with each other. Other than that, very big, and then of course you get to know the people, the front of the house, the back of the house. Like, other than that, it doesn't even feel like a similar program, to be honest.
Yeah, I agree with you.
All right. So we're way over an hour. So we will save our White Lotus breakdown, because I did like White Lotus, I think more than you did. And
I think so too.
I'd like to have that conversation about it. But like I said, this is where we're ready. We're already deep into this episode, which will probably have to be 2 episodes as it is, because it's so long.
Yes.
So we'll get this one out, and then maybe as we have plenty more episodes of this show to talk about, Nine Perfect Strangers, and in the midst of that, we will also talk about White Lotus.
I'm with you.
All right. So I had a whole bunch of recommendations in there. If I had to pick one out of all those recommendations earlier, you know what I'm going to recommend? People have probably already, that's too easy, I think. I was going to say my original was going to be to watch The Good Place with Manny Jacinto. It was just so much fun on that show. Yeah, but that's not going to be my recommendation, because I think that show's pretty well established. What I would recommend is watching Regina Hall in Support the Girls. Have you ever seen this?
I have not.
There's a really small low-key movie that came out 2 or 3 years ago, got a lot of really great reviews, but like nobody saw this movie. It's a tiny little movie. And Regina Hall plays the hostess at a restaurant somewhere, like, at a, like basically Hooters, basically, but not Hooters.
Oh, okay.
It's like, but a Hooters type place. And she's the
Mhm.
manager, and she's just trying to like get her kids to school, and her mom lives with her, and just like all this, just trying to get her life together. And she's managing all these young girls who work at this restaurant. And all these girls have like all these different personalities, and one's trying to go to college, another one's trying to, support her family. And they have all these like little interactions. And it's basically like a day of them trying to make some cash and hustle for a living, and working at this restaurant. And anyway, it's called Support the Girls, and she's really good in it. And anyway, all the ladies in it are really terrific. And it's a really small movie, but definitely worth checking out. And it did get a lot. Like I said, she actually got some award nominations for this. Like she was like kind of in the conversation, but it never really, like I said, I think most people just missed it in the movie theaters. And I think you can watch it on Amazon Prime though, and it's definitely worth watching. It's very entertaining, and I definitely recommend it.
I really like her. I find she's very fun to watch.
Do you have any recommendations?
I'm in the middle of watching something right now, so let me finish it, and then I will decide whether or not to recommend.
There'll be another cliffhanger, so everyone has to tune in next week to get Sona's recommendation. It's the real cliffhanger of the week.
Well, for once, it's something that's not 20 years old. So.
Oh, there you go. All right. Well, thank you so much. We will talk again. We only have to wait till, what is it, Wednesday? Is Wednesdays when this thing comes out?
That's what I was going to ask you. I think it is Wednesday.
I think it's Wednesdays. Wednesdays or Thursdays. I'm pretty sure it's Wednesday. So
yeah,
we will watch again on Wednesday. Anybody out there, tune in on Wednesday, or hey, it's on Hulu. You can watch it anytime you want. And we will probably drop another episode early next week with that
sounds
review.
good.
All right. Talk to you soon.
Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.